The evidence is mounting. Joe Biden and his family have been peddling influence in return for cash from foreign actors, including Chinese nationals with ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Meanwhile, whistleblowers report that Joe Biden's Department of Justice has obstructed the investigation into the Biden family's foreign business dealings. Today, I'll go over all the key facts and make the case for Joe Biden's impeachment. All that, plus behind the headlines on today's episode of Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.
It is time to go on offense. This is Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.
It's time to open an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. Indeed, it's long past time. But now it finally looks like the walls are closing in on President Biden, Hunter, and their family business, which appears to be a massive, corrupt, influence peddling operation. Indeed, at this point, for reasons I'll explain shortly, President Biden's impeachment is very likely, and that's a very good thing for America and the world. You see, just a couple days ago, President Biden was shown to be a liar. Now, I know that none of you is shocked. We all know President Biden is a liar. But this particular lie that Joe Biden was caught in is a particularly significant one. That's because it concerns President Biden's knowledge about his son Hunter's business dealings in China. During a hearing before a federal judge this week, lawyers for Hunter Biden revealed that Hunter made over $1 million in transactions with foreign businesses, including $664,000 from CEFC China Energy Company. Before it went bankrupt in March 2020, CEFC China Energy was one of the 10 largest private companies in China, and it had all sorts of ties to the CCP and the Chinese military and intelligence apparatus. Hunter's lawyer's admission in court that Hunter received a huge sum of money from CEFC China Energy contradicts Joe Biden's repeated claims that his son never received any money from a Chinese entity. Here's what Joe Biden said on the subject in one of the 2020 debates with President Trump.
My son has not made money in terms of this thing about, what are you talking about, China. I have not had it. The only guy made money from China is this guy. He's the only one. Nobody else has made money from China.
My son has not made money in terms of this thing about China? Really, Joe? It's interesting that in that statement, Joe implicitly claimed to have knowledge about Hunter's business dealings. Enough knowledge at least to claim that Hunter made no money from China. It's far more interesting, though, that Hunter's lawyers have now contradicted Biden's claim in open court. So either Joe Biden's claim is false, or Hunter's lawyers are lying. Hunter's lawyer's admission in court that Hunter made money from China is basically an admission against Hunter's interests. Now, I'm not saying that it's an admission against interest in a technical legal sense. Rather, I'm saying that the statement is very likely true as far as it goes, because Hunter would probably not want to reveal any of his income from China-linked sources unless forced to do so. Revealing that information doesn't make Hunter look good. It's against his personal interests. So because it's a statement made in court, and because it's a statement that has negative implications for Hunter, we can be pretty sure that Hunter's lawyer is not lying when he stated that Hunter had income of $664,000 from CEFC China Energy Company. He probably had even more in other years. And that means that Joe Biden's claims that Hunter didn't make money from China are simply not true. But the evidence that Joe Biden was lying and that the Biden crime family has made a lot of money peddling influence in China, Ukraine, and elsewhere goes far beyond Hunter's lawyer's admission in court. And the mounting evidence supports the conclusion that President Joe Biden committed impeachable offenses. But before I talk about the incredibly damning facts about the Biden crime family involving China and Ukraine, let's talk just a little bit about the shocking evidence that the investigation into Hunter Biden and his foreign business dealings has been thwarted and obstructed by Biden's Department of Justice and Attorney General Merrick Garland. Consider the testimony of the two IRS agent whistleblowers who recently testified before the House Oversight Committee. The testifiers, Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, testified that the IRS probe into Hunter's income, which began in 2018, did not follow normal procedures. Ziegler said that prosecutors, quote, slow-walked the investigation and put in place unnecessary approvals and roadblocks from effective and efficiently addressing the case. The probe ran into so many delays that eventually the statute of limitations ran out. Then, in October 2022, David Weiss, the U.S. attorney in charge of the case, privately told Shapley and Ziegler that he was not the person with the authority to charge Hunter Biden outside of Delaware. But Attorney General Merrick Garland told Congress that Weiss's investigation of Hunter would not be restricted. He made that pledge to Congress. So the question arises, did Merrick Garland, at the direction of Joe Biden, stymie the IRS probe of Hunter Biden's income to cover up the Biden family business and its apparent influence peddling schemes? The evidence certainly suggests that that is exactly what happened. And the evidence merits full impeachment inquiries into both Merrick Garland and Joe Biden. Here's one more fact that strongly supports the need for a full impeachment inquiry. According to the Washington Examiner, Alexander Mackler, a close associate of the Biden family, appears to have spent years working in the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, led by U.S. Attorney David Weiss, including during the months when whistleblowers said the office took up an investigation of Hunter Biden. Did Alexander Mackler have anything to do with Weiss's team blocking and slow-walking the Hunter Biden investigation? That's a question that needs to be answered. We know, according to the testimony of the whistleblowers, that an assistant U.S. attorney who worked alongside Mackler in David Weiss's office intervened to slow down or stymie the investigation on multiple occasions, including by stopping FBI agents from questioning witnesses about Joe Biden's involvement in foreign business affairs. According to the whistleblowers, this colleague of Mackler's also tipped off Hunter Biden's attorneys about a planned search of Hunter Biden's storage unit. So just how close to Joe and Hunter Biden was Alexander Mackler? Well, reportedly, Mackler served as a press secretary in Joe Biden's Senate office. He was also legal counsel in Joe Biden's vice presidential office, and he served on the Biden transition team in 2020. And according to emails found on Hunter's laptop, Mackler has a close personal relationship with Hunter Biden as well. So we have a close Biden family associate and friend of Hunter Biden working for the U.S. attorney in charge of the Hunter Biden investigation, an investigation that, according to the whistleblowers, was actively stymied and blocked by that close Biden family associate's colleagues at the U.S. attorney's office. You know the saying, where there's smoke, but wait, there's more. We haven't even talked about the direct evidence of foreign influence peddling yet, and there's a lot of it. Let me briefly summarize some key points about what we know so far. Let's start with Ukraine, and then I'll talk a bit about China. I'm sure most of you remember that video clip of Joe Biden bragging in 2018 about how he got Viktor Shokin fired in 2016 when Biden was vice president. Viktor Shokin was the prosecutor who was, until Joe Biden pressured the Ukrainian government to fire him, investigating Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company that paid Hunter Biden $83,000 a month to sit on its board, even though Hunter knows nothing about Ukraine or energy, and even though Hunter has no useful skills and brings nothing to the table, except, of course, his relationship to the big guy, Joe Biden. So it's not too surprising that, according to an FBI informant report recently revealed by Senator Chuck Grassley, Joe and Hunter Biden received $5 million each from Mykola Zlochevsky, the founder of Burisma. And that money, according to the informant report, was sent to Joe and Hunter after Joe Biden threatened to withhold aid to Ukraine unless the prosecutor looking into Burisma was fired. So based on Joe Biden's own bragging, plus the FBI informant report released by Senator Grassley, it really does appear that Joe and Hunter likely engaged in bribery and corrupt acts, receiving money from a foreign source in exchange for using Joe Biden's influence as vice president of the United States to exert pressure on a foreign government to change its policy toward that foreign source's company. That right there should be the biggest scandal in the history of American politics. And it would be if the legacy media weren't just a bunch of shills for the Bidens and the radical left. But actually, the scandal of the Biden crime family goes far beyond Ukraine. It reaches to the other side of the globe, where the Bidens appear to be in league with the greatest force for evil on the face of the planet, the ruling Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. It appears that the money from CEFC China Energy Company exceeded the $664,000 that Hunter's lawyers said that Hunter received. In fact, bank records and emails obtained by the Oversight Committee show that between August 2017 and October 2018, payments of over $4 million made their way from CEFC China Energy Chairman Ye Jianming through a network of shell companies to Hunter Biden-related companies, while payments of over $75,000 made their way to James Biden-related companies. Chairman Ye also paid Hunter a $1 million retainer fee for legal services in 2017, and he also gave Hunter a large diamond worth something around $80,000. So, who is Chairman Ye? Well, CEFC China Energy Chairman Ye Jianming is closely tied to the CCP, and it is widely rumored that he's also linked to Communist China's military, the People's Liberation Army, and also to China's Ministry of State Security, China's intelligence apparatus. Tellingly, the payments to Biden associates ceased not long after Biden left the vice presidency. Given that fact, together with the complete lack of legitimate work and the fact that payments were coming from adversaries, including Chinese nationals linked to the CCP, there's really only one reasonable conclusion. Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and their family were indeed involved in a massive influence peddling scheme, selling the CCP access to and influence over the then Vice President of the United States. So now, let's consider the other side of the ledger. The facts show that the Biden family has profited massively from CCP-linked entities. What has Biden done for the CCP? Well, quite a bit, it turns out. Communist China wants to replace the United States as the world superpower and subjugate the world to serve the CCP's interests. Instead of opposing and checking the CCP, standing up against this greatest force for evil in the world, Joe Biden has kowtowed to Beijing time and again. Let's just consider one recent, particularly egregious example. Multiple reports confirm that China has maintained a secret spy base in Cuba since 2019. Chinese telecom companies Huawei and ZTE reportedly operate 4 electronic eavesdropping facilities in Cuba as well, no doubt working hand in hand with the Chinese spy base there. And now, China reportedly is planning a new military training facility in Cuba. Communist Chinese troops may soon be stationed just 100 miles from Florida, right alongside China's spy facilities. The espionage and surveillance threat alone is beyond alarming and must be stopped. So how has President Biden responded? Well, he's preparing for a retreat. The U.S. Coast Guard has ended its maritime security detachment at the naval base at Guantanamo Bay. It's been there for a long time. We are pulling assets out of Gitmo just as Communist China is establishing itself on the very same island. Secretary of State Blinken should have challenged China's aggression on his recent trip to Beijing, but he didn't. Instead, he begged President Xi to reestablish military-to-military communications, and China refused. Meanwhile, as China continues its rapid military buildup and threatens to invade the free and peaceful island of Taiwan, which was never a part of the PRC and is a key U.S. ally where we have vital strategic interests, Biden does nothing. Instead of calling out the CCP for its aggression against Taiwan and denouncing the CCP's crimes against humanity, Biden dispatched Blinken to China, where he publicly announced that the United States does not support Taiwan independence. The United States should be focused on building up its military to deter CCP aggression. Instead, over and over, Biden has capitulated to Beijing. That's dangerous. And one can't help but wonder if Biden's weakness is motivated by the fact that his family has been bought and paid for by the CCP. Certainly, that's an explanation that fits all of the facts. The Biden family was peddling influence to the CCP when Joe Biden was vice president, and it seems that Joe Biden as president has continued to act in ways that advance the interests of Communist China. So, has Joe Biden committed impeachable offenses? Well, let's consider for just a brief moment the section of the U.S. Constitution regarding impeachment. Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution states, quote, "The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office for impeachment, on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors," close quote. So, bribery is one of the only 2 crimes actually listed in the U.S. Constitution as grounds for impeachment. The Biden crime family's main line of business appears to be peddling influence to foreign entities and persons and governments in exchange for money. In other words, receiving bribes, public corruption. That's where all the evidence points. Even worse, the evidence strongly suggests that the Biden family's corrupt actions were done to benefit Communist China. It's the biggest political scandal in U.S. history. The House Republicans are doing the right thing by leading ongoing investigations into Biden family corruption. The investigations have been very fruitful. Now, in light of all the evidence that has been revealed, it is time for House Republicans to open up formal impeachment proceedings. The American people deserve to know the full truth about President Biden's corruption. President Biden must be impeached. Considering all the facts that have come to light to date, I believe he will be impeached. Once a full impeachment inquiry is opened, the massive scope and gravity of Joe Biden's corruption and the enormity of his offenses against his own country will be apparent to all. Even the legacy media won't be able to ignore the truth completely. The taint of the Biden crime family will sully the reputation of the Democrats for decades, and we will finally have a real chance to defeat the radical left, close the door on the Democrats' socialist authoritarian schemes, stop the CCP, and get our country back to its founding principles. Well, if you like the content that we are providing, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment in the comment section. If you're listening to the audio podcast, give us a 5-star rating. Doing each of those things helps the show tremendously. Now for Behind the Headlines. First up today, a restaurant in Princeton, Minnesota has decided to close its doors, citing burdensome taxes and regulations as the reason for its closure. The restaurant also thanked, in a very sarcastic way, far-left Governor Tim Walz and, of course, far-left President Joe Biden. The White House has been shifting focus to the economy recently. Many in the Biden administration are talking about Bidenomics, as if they are trying to talk Americans into believing that the economy is booming and inflation is just, a figment of their imagination. It's kind of an odd strategy, and it isn't working. Across our country, we hear countless stories like that of the restaurant owners in Princeton. Here in Minnesota, where Democrats in the legislature just spent several months using their newly won total control of state government to wage war on business, entrepreneurship, common sense, family values, sanity, and even reality itself, businesses and people with means are fleeing the state en masse. During the awful and needless COVID lockdowns of 2020, huge companies like Walmart and Target were allowed to stay open, while many small businesses were forced to shut down and never reopened their doors. In the aftermath of the terrible economic destruction, with the economy failing to fully rebound even as inflation spiraled upward, the last general election should have been an easy red wave for Republicans. But that red wave never materialized, and that's because Republicans were not sufficiently bold, especially in parts of the country like here in Minnesota. Too many Republicans, especially here in Minnesota, tried to coast to victory, hoping the overall environment would just carry them through. And they refused to lean into the culture war or to stand up boldly for conservative values. Too many Republicans, especially here in Minnesota, failed to offer an alternative to the Democrats that was sufficiently compelling to capture the attention and hearts and minds of voters. And now, too many Republicans, especially in Minnesota, are learning exactly the wrong lesson from their losses in 2022. They think that they can win going forward by being more like Democrats, by being more moderate and less conservative. Former gubernatorial candidate Scott Jensen even wrote an op-ed stating that he is, quote, re-examining his position on abortion. We can be both pro-life from a personal perspective and we can be pro-choice from a policy perspective, Jensen recently said. Well, that position is false and counterproductive. It's wrong. It's doublespeak. It's the kind of nonsense that makes politicians seem less credible, and it undermines the pro-life cause. It also renders Jensen and any other Republican who takes a similar stance unelectable, even in a general election. That's because Democrats and pro-choice voters won't be won over just because a Republican switches to a pro-choice position. And persuadable voters, who don't care much about the abortion issue, will see such a move as conveying wishy-washiness. It comes across like someone who is, trying to say anything just to get elected. And of course, such a move also turns off huge numbers of Republicans, because Republicans are in general very strongly pro-life. So Jensen's new abortion position is thus not only terrible from a policy and moral perspective, it's stupid politics. That's especially true when you consider this. With the economy continuing to stumble and inflation continuing to break family budgets, coupled with Biden's scandals, leftist transmania, and crime that continues to ravage Democrat-controlled cities, 2024 should be a massive opportunity for Republicans, but only if we stand boldly for our conservative principles. The Democrats have to lie to get elected. Whether it's Walz or Newsom or Biden, they won't be able to fool the American people. The economy really is in bad shape, and Americans have had enough of Democrats' radical leftism. The best attempt Biden made at making his case for Bidenomics was a misleading chart showing millions of jobs coming back under his presidency. He just left out one, small detail. The jobs that came back are just the jobs that the COVID lockdowns destroyed. Americans see through such ludicrous arguments. In the meantime, Biden found a way to print and spend billions upon billions of dollars, and inflation is killing Americans, and it shouldn't be. President Trump showed us what life could be, unleashing the American economy, unleashing American energy, unleashing American manufacturing, putting American interests first, and standing up for America's founding principles. It will take a lot of work, but with the help of President Trump and with bold conservative candidates, Republican candidates up and down the ballot, we can indeed make America great again. All right, second up today. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison was in the news again, and not surprisingly, it wasn't for doing anything good. Reportedly, Ellison's most recent unhinged take is saying that Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas should be impeached. He also said a mandatory retirement age should be implemented for the nation's highest court, and Ellison compared Justice Thomas to the pro-slavery villain in the movie Django Unchained. Which is crazy. I'm going to start off with an obvious observation that many of you are probably thinking. If it wasn't for moderate establishment Republicans, we wouldn't have an Attorney General Keith Ellison in Minnesota. Moderate establishment Republicans' insistence that we race to the left, play nice, avoid so-called controversial issues, and keep our heads down cost us several races here, including the AG's office. To fight leftists, we need to boldly stand up for and speak truth. Keith Ellison has made a career out of being a radical leftist, challenging any Democrat for the top radical spot in the party. Indeed, he was deputy chair of the DNC and made a run for chair. His recent despicable attack on Clarence Thomas proves just how radical and unhinged Ellison is. Justice Thomas has an unimpeachable record. By all accounts, Justice Thomas is a very friendly person with a passion for the Constitution and the rule of law. His originalist jurisprudence never wavers and is exactly what this country needs in its courts. His constitutional analysis is always edifying to read. There can be no doubt that he is among the most intelligent and effective jurists ever to sit on the high court. The Democrats have only just decided to attack the Supreme Court as an institution because we have shifted from a more left-leaning activist court to a more conservative originalist one. Does it matter the last 70 odd years have been pretty much dominated by leftist justices who don't care what the law says and simply import their personal political views into their decisions? No, of course not. Not to the Democrats. Now is the time for reform, the Democrats say, because now their ideological peers aren't the majority on the court. It's hypocrisy, but we have to remain strong in opposition to attempts to pack the court. The court must remain free from politics. It needs to be an institution of law and judgment, not of politics and will. Now, I'll talk about the problem of judicial supremacy in future episodes. Clearly, we need to take steps to make sure that the courts don't go beyond their prescribed constitutional role. But that's not what this Supreme Court is doing. They are, by and large, at least in the last several major decisions, just applying the Constitution according to its original meaning and guarding free speech, the separation of powers, and all the other constitutional bulwarks that defend and guarantee our freedoms. So we can't budge on this. Whether it's the court or the Electoral College, we must be able to stand strong and continue fighting for the America that the founders gave us. All right, finally today, Breaking Bad star Bryan Cranston recently gave a speech targeting Disney. Now, this was in relation to the Hollywood writers' strike and not a protest of the horrific content that Disney has been putting out as of late. So don't get too excited. This isn't a Hollywood actor revealing himself as a conservative warrior. In the speech, Cranston went after AI, essentially saying that we can't let robots replace Hollywood writers and actors. Now, I'm not too interested in the writers' strike, nor am I invested in it at all. While it may be delaying certain shows from airing, the world keeps turning without Hollywood at 100% efficiency. We don't really need them. It is interesting to hear this from Cranston, however. It seems like many of the writers and actors agreed with what he was saying. It's no secret Hollywood is a left-wing place, but I actually tend to agree on this point. We shouldn't let AI replace us. But where were these same people when the Rust Belt had its jobs shipped overseas? Where were they when coal miners were being decimated by the Obama economy? Where were they when blue-collar jobs around the country were being outsourced to China? Well, they didn't care. I'm not saying we should support an AI takeover of Hollywood out of spite, but we can't forget the lack of care and outright hostility these Hollywood elite liberals have for working men and women. We should fight for American jobs and good-paying jobs at that, and we cannot forget the contempt that these people have for American workers. Well, that's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like the content that we are providing, please go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to the audio podcast, give us a 5-star rating. I know I'm a broken record on this, but doing each of those things helps the channel tremendously. It helps us multiply and grow the impact of the show. And one more thing, remember this, the CCP must be destroyed.